It all started when Helen left yet another violation notice on my door. This time, she claimed my grass was too green. Apparently, the approved aesthetic required lawns to be a uniform shade of dull, lifeless yellow-green to maintain consistency in the neighborhood. Ridiculous. I crumpled the letter and tossed it aside. I wasn't about to let a woman who once fined a neighbor for having an overly festive Christmas wreath tell me how to maintain my lawn. But things took a dark turn that night. My security cameras caught Helen in the act at 2 a.m. She crept onto my lawn, dragging a hose behind her. But this wasn't ordinary watering. No, her hose was connected to a massive industrial container labeled Bleach solution. I watched in shock and rage as she meticulously drenched my lawn in chemicals. Her smug little face was barely visible under the dim glow of my porch light. She worked fast, soaking every inch of grass before scampering back to her house, completely unaware that she had just sealed her own fate. By morning, the damage was already visible. Patches of my once lush green lawn had turned sickly yellow, the scent of chemicals still lingering in the air. I was fuming, but I knew better than to confront her outright. Instead, I checked my home's water system. I had suspected for a while that our houses might be linked to the same irrigation system, since the developers had cut corners when building the neighborhood. If that was true, Helen had just poisoned her own yard. By midday, she found out the hard way. I stepped outside just in time to hear a blood-curdling scream from Helen's yard. She was on her knees, staring at her once pristine lawn, now a patchy, dead mess, even worse than mine. Her sprinklers had activated at dawn, soaking her entire yard with the very same bleach she had dumped on mine. I walked over, trying way too hard to keep a straight face. "Wow, Helen, what happened?" I asked innocently. She turned, her face twisted in fury. You did this. You sabotaged my sprinklers." I chuckled. "Oh no, Helen. That's just neighborhood irrigation at work. You wanted the lawns to match, didn't you?" Helen demanded an investigation, but it backfired spectacularly. When city officials came out to inspect, they found that she had illegally tampered with both my water supply and the community irrigation lines. Not only was she fined thousands of dollars, but the bleach runoff had contaminated a nearby storm drain, landing her in even bigger legal trouble. Within a week, Helen's yard was a barren wasteland. Her HOA status was under review, and the neighborhood had a new favorite joke. But it didn't stop there. The city, now heavily involved due to the contaminated water, began digging deeper into Helen's antics. They discovered multiple complaints about her unauthorized improvements to the community, including tampering with public property and harassing other homeowners. More neighbors started coming forward. One homeowner revealed security footage of Helen digging up their flower bed because she thought it clashed with her vision for the neighborhood. Another neighbor shared emails where Helen threatened legal action against them for having a non-compliant garden gnome. By the time the local news got hold of the story, Helen was frantically trying to spin the narrative. She claimed she was just trying to maintain order in the community, but no one was buying it. A week later, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. Helen showed up furious, demanding they defend her actions. Instead, they turned on her completely. "We had no idea she was engaging in illegal activities," one member said, distancing himself as much as possible. "She was acting on her own," another insisted, pushing the blame onto Helen alone. Helen tried to argue, but it was clear she was finished. The board voted unanimously to strip her of her position. But that wasn't the worst part. City officials announced that due to her history of harassment and illegal activity, she would be personally fined for damages to both private and public property, tens of thousands of dollars. Helen's face was ashen. She had spent years controlling the neighborhood, bullying homeowners, and bending the rules to her will. And now, she was paying for every bit of it. But Helen wasn't done. After being stripped of her HOA title, fined into oblivion, and humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood, she refused to go down quietly. Rather than accepting defeat, she doubled down, stomping through the neighborhood like a dictator clinging to the last scraps of power. Even without her title, she still believed she was in charge. One evening, as I was watering what was left of my lawn, I saw Helen lurking at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, her expression sour. "Still enjoying your little victory?" she sneered. I turned off the hose. "Oh, absolutely. It's been wonderful watching you finally face consequences for once." She scoffed, stepping closer. "You think you've won, but you don't understand how this works. I am this neighborhood. These people, they need me. I grinned. Helen, they literally voted you out. The only thing they need from you is to leave them alone. Her jaw clenched, but before she could spit out another excuse, a city maintenance truck pulled up in front of her house. Helen turned, frowning, as two workers hopped out, clipboards in hand. What's going on here? She demanded. One of the men flipped through a folder. Helen Davis? We're here for a city-ordered hazard assessment of your property. We received reports of illegal water contamination from a nearby storm drain. This inspection is mandatory. Helen's face went pale. That's absurd. I didn't contaminate anything. The worker raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, the bleach runoff from your property exceeded EPA's safety limits. This isn't just a neighborhood issue, it's a state-level environmental violation. Helen whirled to face me. You reported me. I shrugged. No, but it turns out multiple neighbors did. Guess people are tired of you ruining everything you touch. Over the next few days, Helen's life became a bureaucratic nightmare. Inspectors combed through her property, taking samples from her soil, water lines, and drainage system. And what they found made everything worse. Not only had Helen's bleach stunt caused serious chemical damage, but officials discovered she had been redirecting excess water flow from her property straight into the public system, without proper filtration. In short, she had been violating environmental regulations for years, long before she tried to sabotage my lawn. The city did not take this lightly. Helen was issued a cease and desist order, preventing her from using or altering any water lines on her property without approval. But that was just the beginning. A week later, she received a formal lawsuit from the city, citing multiple violations of municipal code, environmental damage, and tampering with public infrastructure. The potential fines alone ran into the six figures. Her once smug, controlling demeanor gone, Helen tried to argue her way out, even going so far as to threaten legal action against the city, which went about as well as you'd expect. Her attorney dropped her case within a week. With nowhere left to turn, Helen did what she always did when she felt cornered. She blamed everyone else. She stormed into the next community meeting, desperate to turn the neighborhood against me. He set me up, she shrieked, pointing at me as she stomped toward the podium. This was a targeted attack, a personal vendetta. The room fell silent. No one, not even her former allies, stood up for her. One of the former board members cleared his throat. Helen, you did this to yourself. Helen's face contorted in fury. This neighborhood is falling apart. Look at what's happening without me. Everything will go to chaos. Another voice cut through the silence. Mrs. Peterson, an elderly neighbor who had lived in the community for decades, spoke up. No, Helen, she said softly, shaking her head. Without you, everything's been better. Helen stormed out, and that was the last time she ever spoke at a community meeting. Because after that, her legal troubles only got worse. Helen had officially lost everything. Her title, her power, her influence. But the worst was yet to come. With multiple lawsuits piling up and city officials breathing down her neck, she had no way out. The damage she had done to both my lawn and the neighborhood's water system had triggered state-level penalties. And when the environmental department got involved, things escalated even further. A week after her disastrous attempt to rally the neighborhood against me, a legal notice appeared on Helen's door. She was being sued by the state's Environmental Protection Agency. Her face when she read it was priceless. The state had concluded their investigation, and the results were even worse than we thought. Not only had her bleach runoff contaminated the storm drain, but it had seeped into a nearby wetland preservation area, affecting local plant life and potentially harming the ecosystem. The fines? Over $250,000. Helen, of course, freaked out. She started screaming at the inspectors, waving her arms around, demanding to see a supervisor. But they weren't interested in her tantrum. The evidence is clear, ma'am, one of them said flatly. You're responsible for the damage, and you'll be required to pay for the cleanup. Helen actually collapsed on her porch. But the financial disaster wasn't the only thing on the horizon for her. Turns out, her unauthorized irrigation modifications had caused water pressure issues throughout the entire block. Multiple neighbors had reported ongoing plumbing problems, and when the city ran a full infrastructure check, they found that Helen had illegally diverted excess water from her own home, causing a strain on the system. In simple terms, she was literally stealing water from the neighborhood. And guess what? That's a felony. The very next morning, 2 uniformed officers arrived at Helen's door. She tried to slam it shut in their faces, but that wasn't happening. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for felony tampering with public utilities and environmental violations," one of them said. Helen let out a horrible shriek, insisting she was innocent, but they didn't care. They cuffed her right there on her porch, in full view of half the neighborhood. The best part? The moment she was in the back of the squad car, neighbors actually started clapping. The arrest was just the beginning. With Helen gone, the city took over her property, preparing to auction it off to pay her debts. But the level of damage inside her house was shocking. Apparently, Helen had completely trashed the interior. When the city conducted an inspection, they found massive water damage from faulty plumbing she had installed herself, mold infestations due to poor ventilation, a broken septic system that had overflowed into the backyard, and thousands of dollars in unpaid fines from various code violations. Her house, now completely worthless, sat abandoned for months, an eyesore in the middle of the very neighborhood she had once controlled with an iron fist. Eventually, the bank foreclosed on it, and it was sold for a fraction of its original value. As for me, with Helen officially out of the picture, life in the neighborhood thrived. The HOA, now under actual reasonable leadership, focused on making things better, not worse. The ridiculous fines? Gone. The constant surveillance? Gone. For the first time in years, people felt free to enjoy their own homes. One day, while I was planting some new grass to fix the damage Helen had caused, my next-door neighbor came over. "Hey," he said with a grin. "I heard you're getting a check from the city soon." I raised an eyebrow. "What?" He chuckled. "Helen's court-ordered restitution. She was found personally liable for the damage she caused to your property. Looks like you're getting a pretty nice payout." And when that check arrived, let's just say I made sure to replant my lawn in the greenest, most vibrant shade of grass possible. Because after all that nonsense, I wanted Helen to see it every time she drove past on her way out of town. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.